In this particular weekend, focusing on joy, we're going to not just think about the four immeasurables. Actually, if you have books that, like Dharma books that are digital, you search the word joy. There's a lot of different ways that Buddhism talks about joy. There's like Dharma joy, and there's joyous effort, and there's joy in the four immeasurables, and there's different kinds of meditational states and things like that. This particular talk is going to more be oriented towards the four immeasurables and the joy that's talked about there. And then Venerable Simke is going to give us a teaching on joyous effort tomorrow. So luckily, I had time over this last winter retreat. I knew I was going to be doing this, so I thought about joy a lot, which was, if you know me very well, probably a good idea. I would say I want to present my perspective first, because I did reflect about this a lot. And, well, honestly, when I moved here, a young friend who knew Venerable Chodron better than I did and had spent maybe more time here at that point, said, well, there's three things you need to do. And one, I think the first one was something like be mindful. I can't remember that. The second one was don't complain about anything. And the third was be joyful. And that was actually quite a challenge for me, I'd have to say. It's something I've had to work on a little bit, so maybe I speak from experience on some of this. But during this winter retreat, I got actually kind of into some personal distress about the world events and some of the history in the world, and kind of had a little, I don't know, that was a little challenging for me. So at one point I pulled out this book by Thich Nhat Hanh, which is one of the first books I ever really read. I mean, I had read Buddhist books and all, but this was the first one that I think really spoke to me. And it was called Being Peace, and I hadn't looked at it in decades. And there were some things in there that just, I can see why that book really spoke to me. And I think this is my perspective on the reflections and my orientation towards this topic. So he talks about that we have to be, moment by moment, have sovereignty over our minds. And this is actually what we talk about in a way when we talk about having a precious human life, that one of the most beautiful aspects about having a precious human life is that every moment we have the potential, we actually can, if we can get ourselves to that place in our practice, we can actually turn our minds towards wholesome things. And the Buddhist teachings, in my personal view, have the capacity to help. They have helped me with any state of mind I've ever experienced in this life. So I believe they have that capacity. So we have this kind of both moment-to-moment kind of opportunity to have some sovereignty over our minds. And then we also have a huge potential that that is spoken about quite eloquently in Buddhism. And I think many people have some sense that we have a lot of capacity as human beings, and maybe we don't tap it all. And so we have potential. And so, in a sense, our motto here at the Abbey is creating peace in a chaotic world. And I think of this as peace and joy, actually, in myself. So I want to read this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that I think kind of sums it up for me. It's this, how he starts this book, the very first chapter, the very first words, and he titles the chapter, Suffering is Not Enough. Life is filled with suffering, but it's also filled with many wonders, like the blue sky, the sunshine, the eyes of a baby. To suffer is not enough. We must be in touch with the wonders of life because they are within us and around us, anywhere and at any time. And if we're not happy, we're not peaceful. We cannot share peace. We see our retreat this weekend is sharing your joy. So we're on the first word, sharing. We can't share peace and happiness with others if we aren't peaceful and happy ourselves, even those we love, even those we live with. So if we're peaceful, if we're happy, if we can smile. He's a very poetic writer, right? We can blossom like a flower, and everyone in our family, our entire society will benefit from our peace. And then he goes on to say, do we have to make a special effort to be joyful? No. you can just enjoy the blue sky. You don't have to travel to do it and all that. He makes these points. Do we have to practice to be able to enjoy? No, we can just do this. Our lives, every second of our lives can be like this. Wherever we are, anytime, we have this capacity. And this is, I think, what interests me in Buddhism was his ability to do this, growing up as a young monk in Vietnam during a war around a lot of atrocities. That's what drew me into Buddhism, was him and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we can enjoy the sunshine, the presence of each other, and the sensation of our breathing. We don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to go into the future. We can be in touch with these things now. It would be a pity if we only were aware of suffering. And so he goes on to say that meditation is to be aware of what's going on in our bodies, our feelings, our minds, and in our world. And this is where I think it really resonated with me. This was written in 1987. He says, each day 40,000 children die of hunger, and the superpowers have more than 50,000 nuclear warheads, enough to destroy our planet many times. You can imagine what those numbers are like today. Yet the sunshine is beautiful. The rose that bloomed this morning along the wall is a miracle. Life is both dreadful and wonderful. And to practice meditation is to be aware of both aspects. So we don't have to be solemn in order to meditate. And he says we have to, in fact, to meditate well, have to smile a lot. And I think that for him, this is definitely, the way he practices. But what he says about this is, and what the meaning is really, is that smiling means that we are ourselves. We have sovereignty over ourselves. We're not drowned in forgetfulness. And this is the kind of smile that you might see on the face of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. And so he wrote a poem, these short gathas, these short verses that he uses with breathing meditation, where you say these words to yourself as you breathe in and breathe out. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. And so actually I learned this decades ago, and I use this, and I noticed now over the years what states of mind I'm in when I use this, because usually I'm not very joyful when I do this, because it has 4 verses. So I hang with the first 2 for a while, getting myself calmer. So breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Usually when I do this, I cannot smile. But, you drop most of the words and you just say calming, smiling, calming, smiling. And what happens in my mind is, as I do that, is I quit having all these thoughts that are making me despondent, probably. And I try to smile, and I find, that's hard to do, and I just kind of relax with that. And then I just keep working with it. And eventually my mind settles, I quit having the thoughts, and then I can go into the next part, dwelling in the present moment. I know this is a wonderful moment. Present moment, wonderful moment. And for me, this little practice is very simple, and it's very helpful. It helps me to tap into joy when I can't get my mind to joy. And that's where I want to start this talk with. I feel like we have to work from the inside out a little bit here. So, one thing, like, why would we spend our time this way? A lot of this relates really to what I would call the Buddhist psychology. But here I want to just mention a little bit that, we're very much Westerners and raised with science, but we listened to a talk recently by His Holiness with a panel of people, and the researcher Richard Davison in Wisconsin presented these 4 points that they've been able to do a lot of research on about neuroplasticity, our ability of our brain to change anatomically. And the theme of what they were kind of studying is that well-being is a skill, meaning this is something we can develop. We're not like hardwired to be like depressed or anything else for certain things. I'm sure we have bodies to deal with and chemical imbalances and this and that, but anyways, they've done a lot of studying in the 4 areas they've studied, and all of these help us to have more well-being, which helps us to have more mental happiness and joy. And these are things that actually we develop in our Buddhist practice. So now they've studied these 4 in particular. One is resilience. And that's something that happens with the Dharma practice, actually, is we learn how to deal with our minds, and we don't spend so long being like in the negative, as I would say. Because I see our Dharma practice a lot as we fall down a lot, and that is never the problem. The problem is that we don't get back up quick enough and we wallow in it. We always will be falling down until we have a lot of realizations. So that's going to be our MO, is we're going to be working against our habitual tendencies that are taking us kind of beginningless time affected by ignorance, kind of taking us in an unhappy direction. And we're going to fall down, and that's going to happen. But then we just pick ourselves back up. And the more we practice, and practice properly and learn how to work with our minds, the faster that all happens. And that, I think, is, in my mind, is a kind of resiliency, because he says it's the rapidity with which we recover from adversity. And the next one is a positive outlook, seeing the basic goodness in every human being. Well, that's basically the Buddhist line, right? Buddha nature. And then attention, and that's one reason I want to bring this up, is because that's something we're going to talk about a little bit today. But basically, there's a recent article called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," where a scientist looked into this, and he basically has saying that the education of attention has positive consequences for our well-being. And I can think of that in my own experience of, like, you know, when your mind gets kind of stuck in a rut, like a broken record, that your mind, you might try to be taking it to positive things, or you might not even be watching what your mind is doing, but it will just kind of fall into this broken record that makes you unhappy. Maybe you're concentrating a lot. Maybe you do have a lot of tension then, but that's not working for you. But anyway, we live in a time period where people are multitasking a lot, and I think there's consequences of that. So we should be aware of these things. Both we can learn through the Buddhist practice and through the scientific, exploration of this. And then the fourth one, which he said was the most important, was generosity. Activates circuits that contribute to our well-being, is what he said. So these are things that are all a part of Buddhist practice. That's why he chose to study those. He's a Buddhist practitioner, and he's trying to see what really happens, neurophysiologically. So, these are ways of kind of like, well, another thing that Thich Nhat Hanh, another one of these gathas that I use a lot is waking up this morning, I'm glad to be alive. 24 brand new hours are before me. I vow to live life fully every moment and gaze upon beings with eyes of compassion. This kind of thinking, when you first wake up in the morning, how you're setting your day, it's like, you can't, if you can really embody this in any way, shape, or form, your mind can't go into depression. You have some hope, you have some reason to have hope, and you have tools. So, with Sundru's advice, this one about always be joyful. Well, that's where I had a little bit of a problem. And, even in our mind training slogans, which is, the Lojong, it's a kind of Buddhist practice that was one of our main things that we practice here. There's this thing from the 7-point mind training where they say, always maintain only a joyful mind. And I read that and I'm like, right. So actually, I want to say a little bit more about that. Pema Chodron said constantly, her commentary on that was constantly apply cheerfulness, if for no other reason than because you are on the spiritual path. Have a sense of gratitude to everything, even difficult emotions. That's quite important. Gratitude is like the quick ticket to turning your mind around from any kind of self-centeredness and many things that are going on. So have a sense of gratitude to everything, even difficult emotions, because of their potential to wake you up. But I wasn't quite fully satisfied with that translation. I just wanted to know, because there's a lot of commentaries on this, what this older translation said, which I kind of like. I think it sheds a light on the subject of what we're talking about today. And their translation was, a joyous state of mind is a constant support. That's a different take on this. And it's actually telling us what the function of joy is. Even when they teach you how to meditate, a lot of times they will say, like in this thing about gladdening your mind. You want to enjoy what you're doing. Anything you enjoy, you're going to do more easily without resistance, right? And that's when we learn even how to concentrate, there's an aspect of that to it. So having a joyful state of mind is a constant support. So, all nice and good, but what helped me the most in this was actually reading Geshe Sopa when he was actually talking about these first prayers that we did here. There's these very important parts in our tradition of these preparatory practices of how you start a meditation session. These prayers are a part of it. And breathing meditation, and in here we did the seven limb prayer where we actually talk about rejoicing in our own good fortune and others, or whatever, however it's said. So that's a part of what we should be doing, not that we're always doing it so much, but if we took advantage of that. But anyway, so that was the topic he was on, but he basically said, try to get your mind. If you can't get your mind to a joyful place, just try to get it to neutral. That's what helped me the most, because I was like pushing myself, trying to have a joyful mind when I was like in a negative mind state, and I just couldn't do it. I actually gave up. And I had read this, and I said, okay, well, let's just get to neutral here. That really helped me a lot. It gave me a lot of space. And so when he talks about this, I think it's funny because the way he says it, I think it's informative about how our minds work. He says, if you cannot get all the sense consciousness and the mental consciousness going in a virtuous direction, then at least try to direct them towards objects that are neutral, neither virtuous or non-virtuous. And it's interesting what he says about getting all the sense consciousness and the mental consciousness, and we'll come back to that. Because they're all, sometimes you can take advantage of the way the mind works. So anyway, that's just some advice from my experience. If you're ever having trouble getting to joy, those are things that have helped me along the way. So then we turn a little bit more to the four immeasurable attitudes. This is the prayer we did, right? We've done it a few times together. For those of you who are new, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes, be free of suffering and its causes, those four. And so I want to talk about those a little bit. In the winter retreat, that was a big part of my retreat because we were doing a refuge Nundro, and it was a big part of the practice to do these. In there, it was kind of beautiful. You were dedicating your life, your merit, and all of your good qualities of scripture and realization. And then in particular, you're imagining that you and all other living beings dwell in the peace of the four immeasurables. And it was so beautiful to have that line there. I would just spend some time sometimes with that line and imagining everyone in this whole, every living being just dwelling together in peace with these attitudes in their mind. We need to do this to counteract, a lot of our conditioning. And then once again, in the teachings we've been receiving from on Thursday nights for a while now, in Precious Garland, he's got a verse in there where we're again wanting sentient beings to be adorned with love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, these four immeasurables. And in our one translation it says, in the face of hardship. And it's mostly referring to the equanimity there, I finally figured out. But another one is, another translation is, may they be adorned with love, compassion, joy, and even-mindedness or equanimity, devoid of afflictive emotions. So, these are topics that are actually found in pretty much all the Buddhist traditions. They're in the, yes, I don't know of any Buddhist tradition that they aren't in, I have to say. So we'll talk a little bit about that, starting off with just some of the words so that we're all on the same page. Sometimes they call these the four immeasurables, sometimes they call them the four Brahma Vihara. Maybe you've heard that word, Brahma Vihara. Divine abidings, that's a Sanskrit, Brahma Vihara. And Brahma is this Indian god that was taken up into the Buddhist world, so to speak. And if you remember when the Buddha became enlightened, he was like, wow, how am I going to teach this to anybody else? So he hesitated. And who came was Brahma, was one of the gods that came and, saying, there will probably be someone who can learn from your experience that doesn't have so much dust in their eyes. So you have this sense of Brahma as this loving being who is a protector. That's how the Buddhist world has taken up Brahma, this Indian deity or divinity, I guess you might say, as a protector, but with a loving aspect. And that's how you can kind of think of these four abodes: the loving kindness, compassion, altruistic or sympathetic or empathetic joy, which is what we're mostly focusing on, and then the equanimity. And equanimity also can be translated as impartiality. The word in Tibetan is the same for both, and our main teacher, Lama Tsongkhapa, says that in this context it's actually more impartiality, where we're actually trying to be able to hold any being without any kind of anger or any kind of attachment or even maybe ignorance or disinterest. So you'll hear about it, talked about in those ways. But then the part about immeasurable, because it's a completely different word in Pali, but they're pretty much used interchangeably in a different word in Sanskrit too. But what does that mean? How do we get this immeasurable apart? And that word, it's really referring to, well, one thing said is because this isn't, I don't know if this is correct, this was from Wikipedia and it wasn't, but they have interesting stuff. I like the idea. But they said, and sometimes their stuff is spot on, and take it with a grain of salt. But when developed in a high degree in meditation, these attitudes are said to make the mind immeasurable, like the mind of the loving Brahma. But mostly this word is, I think, more like what Geshe Sopa says, meaning like limitless. Because sentient beings are limitless, and we're taking all sentient beings in, then this is immeasurable. And actually the merit that we generate from thinking about all sentient beings is also immeasurable, because sentient beings are like hard to count, countless, like many. So, yeah. So he says the name is given from the standpoint of the object of these thought, the limitless, countless sentient beings. Numberless, he says. So what are these four immeasurables? So love is, I'm going to use these are expressed, the meaning's the same, but words are a little different with different people. But he talks about is how wonderful it would be if people had the highest happiness, is one way to think about it. Wanting people to have happiness, and the causes of happiness is what love is. And then compassion is wishing for beings not to have any suffering or the causes of suffering, any forms of misery. And then the joy, how wonderful it would be of beings who already have obtained the highest happiness. How wonderful it is that they've attained this. Or others who have intermediate happiness, how wonderful that is. Or even who have a little bit of small pleasure, rejoicing in their happiness and good fortune. And so the point in this moment I want to kind of focus on is that how limitless that is, to think about that for all beings. It's, if you ever notice when you're not doing well, your mind is often kind of narrow. And if you can expand your mind out, when I went to psychotherapy, I think this is one of the main things that she did. She helped me to make my perspective more broad, and it always made my mind better. This is one way to do this. When you find yourself narrowing into that little black spot on the wall that's ruining your day and everything else is white, Or when I used to work as a physical therapist, I'd have 18 patients in a day sometimes, and one interaction would go bad. I actually started counting these because I was like, one interaction was ruining my day, so I had to get like objective. Okay, 12 were good, 6 were neutral, and 1 was bad, and I'm ruining my day. It's like, get real. So, okay, and then equanimity is the wish that beings would be harmonious, have equanimity towards each other without hatred or attachment. That's one way. I want to talk about this more now from the Pali perspective, which Venerable has spoken on a number of times. It's kind of I find this to be a more self-referenced way. She says, and this is a beautiful practice, is first you start with this basic friendliness towards people. That's the love. Your basic orientation in life is like a friendliness towards people. And then when they're running into problems, you have compassion. And then when things are going well for them, you rejoice. And then when they're not doing well and you can't help them, which happens a lot in life, you remain equanimous. You keep the door open. You realize okay, I cannot help them now. But you don't get angry, you don't get, you just let your mind stay even keel, and you're able to keep an open door policy so that when the person is ready, you can actually help them. So that's kind of the gist, and it's quite self-referenced in the way of, I'm going to have this orientation, I'm going to be like this, I'm going to be like that. And even so that's kind of how it starts. I have to say this presentation a little bit now, I think at some point I took some of this from a long, too scholarly for me article from Alex Berzin about this. Like I wouldn't want to present what he said, but I used parts of it because he actually did a survey of all the four immeasurables and all the different traditions, mostly not so much Chinese, but other than that, seemed to. And so he was trying to track down, like, wow, what are they all saying? So it was interesting in that way. And as I thought about this over the winter, I thought, yeah, that one, and the way Venerable's presented it and the way he's talking about it, seems more what's happening on the side of the person doing the prayers a little bit. So the one point I want to make out of this is that, which isn't always clear, but if you kind of start with the Pali canon, the Pali perspective, the Theravada tradition, you might say, that we think of when you think of practitioners from like Sri Lanka and parts of Thailand and Burma, and where's the main? Thailand's, I guess, the main one we think about. They have a main text that everyone in there follows, and it's a real big point in all the traditions, but that these are meditation objects. See, we use them a lot for our motivation, but these are actually meditation objects, and that's what I want to speak about a little bit, partly because of this thing about if our attention is scattered, it's not so great for our well-being, and these are actually meditation objects. We should know that about these. So, so as Venerable Chodron was teaching us last fall, they recognize 40, in the Pali commentaries, they recognize 40 objects of meditation in which you can develop calm abiding or serenity, which is a very, very stable state of concentration. And usually the meditation teacher will prescribe one depending on the meditator's temperament, right? And so there are all these 40 ones, and these four are 4 of the 40. And they are ones that you might, this is the part that's interesting for us, I think. What are they all suitable for? Well, most of you have been around a little bit, know about these meditations on the foulness of the body and mindfulness related to the body. Those are suitable for somebody who has more of a greedy temperament. The words they use in this book are, they kind of push your buttons a little bit. Those of us with attachment, a little clinging nature. We're not greedy, we just cling. And then there's 4 divine abidings. The one we're talking about here are those, they say, with a hating temperament. I'd rather just say those of us who have predispositions for anger. We tend to go to anger a little bit. We're not really hating temperament. We just have, since beginningless time, been dominated with, okay, we're not hating, but whatever. So but it's good to know that. When I watch my mind, and I didn't know enough about my mind to even know what my biggest affliction was, I had to learn from the results. So when you use these different meditation objects, it's kind of instructive, like, oh, that one seems to make, really, that does well for my mind. I guess I have this hating temperament. Anger comes up a lot. I didn't always know that about myself. I had actually, in a psychological way, I had suppressed anger in my life until I was in my mid-20s. I didn't really feel it. So there you go. And then mindfulness of breathing was suitable for someone of deluded temperament, or also speculative temperament. And then they had ones for faithful and intelligent and whatever. But the main point I want to make here is that you can develop a high degree of concentration with these 40 objects. And then there's a kind of a thing they go into about this, these different, the access, concentration, and this and that. I don't think we need to get into that too much. But basically, I think what the bottom line that I want to say is that these 4 can actually be used, love, compassion, joy, and equanimity can be used to develop concentration to a point that you actually reach the jhanas. I mean, higher than most of us are ever going to do in this life. So these are things that we should think about, because these are beautiful objects. So let's talk about this a little bit more from our tradition, which I won't get myself into any trouble with how I explain. So we talk about, stabilizing the mind, meditative stabilization, being on a virtuous object. It's quite important that we use a virtuous object. Breathing is actually neutral and it's good to use, but eventually we try in our practice to get to a virtuous object with a one-pointed state of mind that fixes on the object without any distraction. That's how Lama Tsongkhapa describes it. And I would say that we imbue our minds with these four attitudes. We imbue our minds with these attitudes. They're subjective states of mind. And this is what Jen Lamrimpa talks about. So I'll just explain the way he says this, because it's so clear. The attainment of full awakening is reached by means of cultivating the path. In order to cultivate the path, the objects of one's meditation must be vivid. And two elements are needed to produce that state of vividness in meditation. First is the real vividness coming from the side of the object, and the second is the real strength of clarity that comes from the side of the meditating mind. So when we engage in practices like meditating on these four immeasurables, or bodhicitta, or wanting to get out of cyclic existence, or thinking about the good qualities of our spiritual mentor, those kind of Lam Rim meditations that we do, those are things that we're cultivating these qualities subjectively within ourselves. And to do that, we have to have strength of clarity from the side of the subject, from the meditating mind, from our own mind. The clarity has to rise within our being. And then the other kind of meditation is for objects that are outside of us, like when we meditate on emptiness or subtle impermanence. Then you want to have vividness from the side of the object. So the whole point, so you have to have a very clear vision of what that is. So the whole point is we're talking about two kinds of meditation, and this is straight Tibetan Buddhism here, and probably another, because there's the teachings on concentration are pretty similar across the board in Buddhism, aspects of it. So really, in Tibetan, the word for meditation is used to describe both of those, although they're actually distinctly different things. One is a subjective awareness, and the other is the objective clarity. So when we do these the point here is when we do these meditations on love and compassion and joy and equanimity, we're imbuing our minds with this. We're making our minds into this with all the formulas, whatever we do to get there, and then once we have that state of mind, we concentrate on it, we just dwell in it. That's what we're trying to do. Okay? So that's an aspect that, because we do these in these prayers, maybe you don't even know, maybe you just think we're doing this as a motivation, but this is a practice too. This can be a practice. So one last thing about meditation before we switch gears a little bit. This for me is the carrot. I have to say one of the carrots about working on concentration aspect of meditation is that at some point you can develop pliancy, which is a very joyful, blissful state of mind that comes around with that. When your mind is more stable, then pliancy will eventually develop. It comes naturally, you don't force it, it comes about. And it starts with a mental kind of a real immense joy, which then tapers into something more subtle that's more useful actually, because the joy is a little too energetic, I guess. And then this physical pliancy comes. And what is so great about that to me, like why is this the carrot? Because then your body and your mind are what they call serviceable, flexible, useful. You can actually do these things. You don't have to have you can sit in a posture for hours without any discomfort. The body and the mind are just like, they're completely there on helping you every moment. And we all are endowed with this capacity. We have to just develop it. For me, it's always been a big carrot. Think about it. A suppleness of body that allows you to assume any posture and sit for hours and hours without the slightest feeling of fatigue. That would really help your meditation. So to have that kind of mind and body, I find that to be a motivating factor, I have to say. So I'm just sharing that as a side thing. So that also is one of the kind of joys that if you do your little search, you might come across, because that's one thing where it comes up. Okay, so then Alex Berson's survey, he kind of starts with the Theravada tradition. And I just want to say there's a few things to learn from each of these. And we're going to mostly focus on joy here, but sometimes it's hard because they usually write about all four of them together. They don't really separate them out. And so there was a very well-known monk in the 11th, 12th century when he talked about these and taught on these in a book that's worldwide prominent in that tradition. He talks about them as being limitless. Two of those four are limitless. And I like the way he describes this. And what I want to teach her is this thing about near and far enemies, because this is very helpful for our practice. So he starts with compassion. He says compassion and this sympathetic joy or rejoicing are limitless. Compassion is the factor that makes the heart quiver when others suffer, and is the wish for the removal of their suffering. So we're involved. Our heart is open and involved. We're aware of the suffering, and we don't want them to suffer. But sometimes we aren't there, like what I was saying in the winter when I was hearing these things about history and that were just atrocities, really. They were more than my mind could bear, actually. I couldn't imagine people doing these things. And so I went into what I would call personal distress. That is not compassion. That's what we call the near enemy of compassion. Our word for it is personal distress. They use the word grief. I think personal distress is better. It's being emotionally overwhelmed by the suffering. That's not compassion. We need to know that, right? That's the near enemy. And then the far enemy, or the super duper like opposite, you would say, is actually a cruel or harmful attitude. That's the opposite of compassion. And the way our minds are set up is you can't have these opposites in your mind at the same time. This is how we use this in our practice, really. So like with the joy, when you were trying to develop this joy, well, obvious for me, I was having some trouble, right? So what we're trying to do is have a sympathetic joy, or rejoicing in being this factor in our mind that's happy at another person's prosperity in one way, shape, or form. And what is the direct enemy of that? What is the far enemy or the direct enemy? It's jealousy. Jealousy is the thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But the indirect enemy is also interesting because our mind will do this. And when you understand what jealousy is, you'll see why. What the mind is doing. It makes all sense. The near enemy is exaltation. It's being so excited about their prosperity that your mind is disturbed. And I think that will make a lot of sense as you understand more about jealousy that we're going to talk into. But what you do when you do these four immeasurables is you try to actually get the right state of mind, the one you're going for, joy in this case, and then you're directing it. In the Pali tradition, they start with yourself, and then they extend it to the mother, the father, family, friends, people that are easy. Then to people that are strangers that you don't have a lot of emotional involvement with, and then finally to enemies, and then everyone in your country and so forth, till you have this expansive mind that wants all beings to have, rejoicing in their. See, this is sharing your joy. Your is their joy. You're not sharing your joy with them. You're rejoicing at their joy, at their situation. Okay, so that's kind of what they present. And then another thing in the part of the fundamental vehicle, which just comes from Vasubandhu, and this is important for us because the Tibetan Buddhists share this. For them, he makes a pretty important distinction in this. But at first he starts off with this: joy is the opponent for a lack of joy. I like that right there. It's so plain. Okay, so you're sitting down on your cushion. What comes up? Lack of joy. What do you need? Joy. It's that simple, right? So what do you need to do? This is how I work. I'm very simple. So watch your thoughts and see what's associated, what's going on in there. It's like the meditation we did this morning is all geared, this whole weekend is geared towards helping us with joy. And so the meditation we did this morning, the mind is the source of happiness and pain. It helps us to see what's going on in our mind. What are our thoughts? What's getting in the way? And so, we need to understand what joy is. Joy has its function is this mental happiness. And so in this meditation, you're wishing beings to have this kind of mental happiness. And he makes a shift here, which took me a while to really understand until I realized, oh yeah, the first one was quite self-referenced. And in a way, the way I thought of it was like, my joy is busted. I'm experiencing a joy buster. I need to do one of these 4 immeasurables so I can relate to the other person. I feel it's a little bit self-referenced. I don't know if I'm making sense. What he said is that instead of you're not just rejoicing over what others already have, like they have the big car and I'm going to rejoice that they have it instead of being jealous. No, he's saying you're going to wish them to have joy. And for a long time I didn't quite see, well, what's so big about this shift? Till I realized, oh, they've got the car and I'm not happy about it, so I need to start figuring out how to rejoice. And the other one is this, no, you're wishing all beings to have joy and to have this, especially in joy is the one he did this. It is a shift in my mind when I really thought about it for a while. I'm actually more focused on them now in my mind. That's the shift I saw. Okay, so, and the way he goes about this is one of the meditations we're going to do this afternoon, so I won't describe it. It's kind of similar to what I described already. Start with close, easier to harder, let's put it like that, and we'll do that as a group. Okay. One thing he did say, which I thought was nice, because they always talk about all of them, and they usually focus on love, because that's the first in most of the list. He says, if you're able to perceive good qualities in everyone, you will develop immeasurable love very quickly. That's a practice point, as I see it. And why is that? That was interesting too. Vasubandhu says, because the presence or absence of good qualities now in someone is due to the ripening of their previous positive or negative karma. You have some wisdom about what's going on. You're not just seeing that this person has the big car, you're seeing, wow, this person created the causes for this. You're able to, there's a little more going on. So you can actually perceive when someone's not living up to your expectations. You have a little more wisdom on board saying, wow, they must have some karmic propensities for this. They must have created some causes. They have these problems. It's not just they're a jerk. It's like, wow, maybe I can understand this person. Okay, so now we're going to talk about jealousy, and here's my internal, yeah.
Just a quick question about having joy for someone else that got the big car.
Yeah.
We're here because we're trying to escape from our 8 worldly concerns,
right.
One of which is the big car. So should we really be having joy for somebody that is having happiness from the big car?
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, we have to be careful what we wish for people. I think maybe better to wish them something a little more long-term. I think your point's well taken. And the other thing that makes me think about is, like, say if we're thinking about wishing for someone to have happiness, actually I've kind of thought, the causes of happiness are even more important in a way than that. Yeah, I think it's kind of like a really important discernment to make. But we also, what comes up for me is we can also get kind of jealous of people's good qualities that we do want everyone to have.
Yeah.
So to be able to wish them that, and that's kind of the bigger
But we know that
thing.
the big car isn't going to really bring them happiness.
Right. Yeah.
But it might get them to work.
Yeah.
Because when Venerable taught these 4 measurables once in Newport many, many years ago, when she talked about this particular rejoicing, she said, not only do we want to rejoice that they have the car, but we want to wish that they have the causes so the thing doesn't break down, that it's not a lemon, that they get qualified insurance.
And that they don't get attached to it.
That they don't get attached to it. I mean, so we can raise the bar that says not only do they get the house, but may they not have any rodents, may they not have any mold, may they not, may they be able to afford it.
Yeah, that's right.
So you want to have a bigger picture on how they can create the virtue to have the worldly things that keep them alive and well. So there's a bigger way of looking at it besides just, don't get a big car.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, and Buddha never said we had to wear hair shirts and flog ourselves every day. We can enjoy things. It's the attachment that's the problem, not the things.
Yeah.
Even though we're trying to live a life of simplicity, it's not the things that are the problem. It's our relationship to the things.
That's very true. Okay, so jealousy, my take on it is to recognize it and deal with it. That's how I think about it. Recognizing it is actually hard. It's difficult for us to recognize pride and jealousy. I'd have to say, before I moved here, I didn't have a handle on either of those. I was 50 almost, or I think I was 50 when I moved here about. So, let's see. Where this page is. I need that. So we have to try to identify this emotion within ourselves. I still find this hard. It's like, but here's some good things from Venerable Children. Very astute on this one. With jealousy, we cannot endure somebody else's happiness. We can't endure it. That's this big part of it, I think, that helps us tap into it. We can't endure it. It's very upsetting to the mind, actually. The mind can get quite disturbed. You can't even sleep sometimes because we want it for ourselves. And so she talks about being intolerant of our enemy getting praised or having a good reputation, maybe having opportunities that you wanted. It makes your blood boil. This obnoxious person, he's such a slacker, and somebody's praising him. Ah! So there really is this, you can't endure it. And we make ourselves really unhappy about this with all manners of misery. But what's hard about this, and this is where it's good to have the textbook definition. Jealousy is actually, when we talk about the 84,000 afflictions in Buddhism, we boil them into 3 groups. They're based either on one or a combination of attachment, clinging attachment, or anger or ignorance. So this one, jealousy is a part of hostility. It's a disturbing emotion, focusing on someone other's accomplishments or whatever, their good qualities or possessions or success, the inability to bear their accomplishments due to excessive attachment to our own gain or respect. One time I read that as attachment to goods and services. This is what helped me with jealousy. I was like, because I was having a problem with it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm making people into commodities. It just sickened me. This has helped me a lot. Because I couldn't get it because there's the anger and there's the attachment, and they're both in there. And this is what was so confusing about it. And it's why I couldn't use the rejoicing. It was just dead in the water with me rejoicing because of the anger. How can I rejoice at somebody I'm angry at? That didn't work. So I found something that worked better that got me going on that, but this understanding is important, that there is this hostility, the not being able to bear it because of our own attachment to goods and services, to gain or respect or whatever it is. So for me, where I started to turn this was I learned about the teachings on integrity and consideration for others, and those things were what really helped my mind. And it's great to have this feeling inside of, wow, I want to be seeing human beings as sentient beings that are, could become Buddhas. I don't want to be thinking of them as commodities. And so it's like I wasn't living up to my own values. That's what I was recognizing. That's a loss of your own integrity. It's really important to recognize that. And it's great to say, wow, isn't this great? Like Gandhi said, I have these values. Oh, of course I can't live up to them, is what he said. We can't live up to them. But it's that we have these values. So as one inmate said, I'm not a good Buddhist because I can do all these things. I'm a good Buddhist because I aspire to. So this is the integrity. It's like having our values that we can't always live up to, but we hold these values and we'll work our way into them. So this is how integrity helped me, because I just couldn't stand seeing what I was doing. Okay, so I think and one other thing that the Buddhism expert on on the web, Barbara O'Brien. She's the Buddhism expert. Hey, she comes up a few times, and she's pretty good, I think. It's some site, and she's the Buddhism expert. Anyway, I think she's pretty good. She says, and because this is true, often accompanied by possessiveness, insecurity, and a sense of betrayal. It's incredibly destructive when it gets out of control. This I really believe. I actually know a person that I used to think was maybe mentally ill. And sometimes I think this is actually like the dark side of jealousy taken to such an extreme that it's like pathological. And I think that we're capable of this. So I don't know, that's my own thought.
What were the three? Obsessiveness?
Let's see. Possessiveness, insecurity, and a sense of betrayal. Yeah, I saw that. All that was there when I learned about jealousy here at Sravasti Abbey. So that was the recognize it. Now we're going to the deal with it, right? Just like get up again, don't wallow in this. So as Geshe Sopa says, well, first I skipped this one part. He says it's natural for us. Natural tendency, I don't know. I would say habitual, common. I'm scared the word is natural this. When you see someone better than yourself, it's natural, let's say more common or habitual, to feel jealous. It's common to feel jealous. When they're at the same level with you, you might feel competitive. When you perceive someone as inferior to you, in some respect, contempt can easily arise. He lays that out. I learned that years ago in Tibetan Buddhism, and I think there's some truth to that and something to look at in yourselves. So he's saying here now that restraining ourselves from negative feelings like jealousy is not easy. I think we've had that. They grow up, these things are very habitual. They come out of our, I don't want to say egoistic thought, that's how they said it. They come out of our ignorance related to the sense of self. Let's put it that way. And we can replace these with, the opposite of this is this joyful admiration. And this is what we can do. And what he wants us to understand is that you can't just do this spontaneously, as I had trouble with. A feeling of admiration and sincerely rejoicing in the merits of others. When you find you can't do that, you need to apply some analysis to yourself. And his advice is always so good. The way he started at it is he went to karma, like, what is what is their virtue? What is this virtuous action? What are its effects? So he kind of goes on the karma thing. What's the karma that they're doing? But then he says, now you've looked at what they're doing. Examine your thoughts arising in your mind in response to what you see. And you have to bring your wisdom to bear on these things. This was my experience exactly. Like, just what am I thinking about what's going on here? What is going on? And knowing that it's not going to be spontaneous, I just can't get my mind go to rejoicing. I have to see what's my problem here. I had to understand like what was really transpiring within myself. Why? It's not. It can be multifaceted, but we have to spend time with it over and over, applying our analytical wisdom, our own wisdom to this, with the support of, teachers and books and, friends, Dharma friends, repeatedly applying these so that you can transform these. So for me, what really helped, and I do believe he's right, that eventually a natural, spontaneous admiration will arise. I think that's possible. I don't have doubt about that. But what worked for me was actually this teaching about generosity from Nagarjuna that Venerable taught on November of 2012, I think it was, or something. It was about how generosity helps to get rid of the afflictions. It's a teaching by Nagarjuna in the Chinese canon. And it went through like the 22 afflictions. And I used to have this on my puja table because I didn't know which affliction was happening. So I would just read all of them and decide, oh, maybe it's that one. And I would try what it said to do, and oh, seemed to work. Must have been that one. That worked for me. So this one was because I couldn't get rid of this I couldn't go to rejoicing. He said, being respectfully mindful, first remember, you're in this mode of wanting to be generous. Your mind is trying to do that, right? And then within that, being respectfully mindful of the recipient, one gets rid of jealousy. And so I was like, oh, maybe I need to look at this person and try to be respectfully mindful of them. And so I learned that actually a lot of times it was when I have a disturbing emotion going on with somebody, and this particular one worked quite well, I need to look at that person. And it helps me a lot, because actually what's going on in me is I have these ruminating thoughts that are convincing me of one thing, and then when I look at the person, I'm like, what, I don't want that person to be happy? Here's this person who's like suffering like the rest of us and having this moment of happiness that I'm jealous about, and I look at them and I don't want them to be happy. It's just like, cut it for me, you know, like, so I found that if I could be respectfully mindful of the recipient of my puny generosity, that the jealousy diminished. And I think it helped me to get a little more to neutral, because I had too much anger. Yeah, so those things related to, for me, integrity and looking at the person, so I couldn't just stay with my deluded thoughts. I actually had to look at the person and, wow, it's nothing like what I'm thinking here. You know, whatever. Maybe that will help you too. And then another carrot for us is to think about the results of these 4 immeasurables that come in future lives. So now we're going back to the 4 immeasurables a little bit. And this is a very interesting thing that Alex Berzin talks about. He brings up this thing from the Mahayana Sutras, I think it is. Yeah, these come from the Mahayana Sutras about the 4 immeasurables. And he says, these are the results of when we do this, right? We need to know the advantages of things. It helps us to get some energy. So by building up great love, one is reborn free of harm. And by building up great compassion, one is born with one's roots being stable. And he'll explain these. By building up great joy, and this is interesting, one is born abiding with physical happiness, firm in belief in what is true, and supreme mental joy. That reminds me of our abbess. You know, that is her. Born abiding with physical happiness, firm belief in what is true, and supreme mental joy. I like the idea of firm belief in what is true. That really caught my eye. Because think about when your mind is in doubt. It's kind of in a way like joy, firm belief in what is true versus doubt. Pretty different. So when you're cultivating a joyful mind, in the future, you might have less doubt. That's the way I take that. It would help me. And then by building up great equanimity, one is born not being agitated by happiness or unhappiness. So now he's going to unpack these, and he does this. He puts together kind of like this sutra material with the way Vasubandhu talked about these, the enemy states of mind that we talked about, right? The opposite states of mind of these. And he put this together with the karmic results and explained these, and it's quite nice. I think it's motivating. So, okay, the first one, love overcomes its enemy. Its enemy is what? Ill will and hatred. They are like opposites. You can't have both in the mind at once. So in the manner of which results correspond to their causes in one experience, that's one of the results of karma. When you do something, you're going to experience those kind of, you know, things similar to that in the future. So not wishing others harm results in one not being harmed oneself. That's how that one comes about. And then compassion overcomes its enemy, which is, the enemy of compassion is this cruel or harmful attitude. So hatred and anger is like a wish for violence against someone in one way that somebody dislikes. This destroys our roots of virtue, what he calls that our constructive force. We have this term, roots of virtue. The constructive forces we have, when we have hatred and anger, that devastates those. And consequently, there's going to be a huge delay in wholesome things ripening for you. And when they do, they're going to be weaker. And this is, you know, some of our teachings on karma is we understand how that works. So the wish for others to be free from suffering, rather than for them to suffer, means that your roots of virtue are going to be stable in your mind, right? So then rejoicing in others' good qualities, or in their dharma accomplishments, or in their happiness, this overcomes the enemy of jealousy, not being able to take joy in others' good qualities and all. So in the way that results correspond to their causes in terms of one's behavior, right? When you tend to get angry, you're creating the causes to have a tendency to be angry. When you get angry, you're creating a tendency to be angry, predispositions for anger. So here, when you acknowledge others' true, good qualities, and rejoice in them, this will result in a firm belief in what is true. That makes sense. That makes sense. You're seeing what's true, you're seeing what's beneficial, you're rejoicing in it, and you're making yourself have a firm belief in what is true. And then also by rejoicing in not just their qualities, their true qualities, but actually their happiness and having these experiences of physical and mental happiness, then that's going to result in you having mental and physical happiness. So this is really the thing of sharing your joy, their joy. You're rejoicing in theirs. And then equanimity is, again, overcomes the enemies of attachment towards or longing desire for someone or ill will. And it says, Geshe Sopa or Alex Burson said here that you'd have a neutral feeling towards others. But I don't like to say it that way because the near enemy of equanimity is indifference, which is something my mind has fallen to sometimes. I'm not like really equanimous with somebody, I'm just indifferent, checking out. So I like it when Venerable teaches this, she talks about equanimity in terms of a feeling of affection. So I think it's a little more than neutral.
She says equal care and concern.
Yeah. So, in the manner of results that resemble their causes in one's behavior, one is not agitated by feelings of happiness or unhappiness. That's what you're creating for your future by developing an equanimous mind. Okay, so I think that's the main. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, the last big point that I want to talk about is that we've talked about these four immeasurables in terms of concentration, but really, and when you how do I say this quickly? I just think it's useful to think about this analogy that Jeffrey taught us about the way our mind works. It's useful, this Buddhist psychology of the mind. If you think of your mind as having like this main mind and all these mental factors that go along with it, like your visual consciousness and your ear consciousness and your mental consciousness, and then all these things that arise with it, like your intention and your feeling component of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, your intention, attention, I don't know, we have 52 of them and more. All these things that come with it in certain mind states. If you think of it like a bunch of flashlights shining into a box, some flashlights that you have are like some of the ones around here that are very dim, and other ones are very bright. Some aren't even on. And what happens is the one that is the brightest overpowers the other, and they all mix together and illuminate the box, right? And this is how our mind works to a degree, and you can take advantage of this in a way. Okay, maybe I couldn't get my mind to go to joy, I got it to go to neutral, but there's sometimes when we maybe can't get our mind to do something, but I think of it like, well, we can aspire towards it. And then you kind of start bringing up these virtuous mental factors that we have. Maybe I can't get all the way to this, but maybe I can kind of do something that's in that direction, that's aspiring for it. Because, let's see, what's that word? You know the benefits, you recognize the benefits of something. And so that gives you right there a sense of, I think there's probably some faith in that too, a reasoned faith. So you have all these virtuous things going in the same line. It's kind of like you're trying to get all these virtuous flashlights to go on. And they're going to like drown out, and eventually the other ones are going to fade out, the negative ones. I think it's actually possible for us to work with our minds that way. I think that's actually what we're doing a lot of times. So I wanted to mention that for the last few points. And then the other is that it's not just a matter of concentration. We have to bring our wisdom into this. So I don't want you to leave you thinking that, we're just going to try to single-pointedly develop joy this weekend. As we've seen, as Geshe Sopa was saying, when we can't do these states of mind, we need to bring in our wisdom that we learn to bear on the situation repeatedly. And so one thing is holiness says about this, let's see. That I appreciate. It wasn't about joy, but it relates close enough, and it kind of, I think is a quite important point. he says, love and compassion involve very strong feelings that can even make you cry with empathy, but they're not induced by exaggeration. See, sometimes we might think we have love, we might think we have compassion, but, or certain states of mind, but they're not induced by any exaggeration. They're a valid cognition. They're a reliable mind. And what are they reliable on? They're seeing, like love and compassion are seeing the plight of sentient beings and the appropriateness of being concerned for them. This is like grounding. I had a lot of, you brought this up a little bit recently. I've always wondered about, one of my core beliefs is that people have a good nature at heart. Before I had Buddhism, this was the way I would say it. And I still kind of say it the same way. And sometimes when they talk about Buddha nature, sometimes they kind of use that word. It kind of doesn't work. It's a little too inherent, I realize now. I'm trying to find, like, where's that good thing in all of us? And I'm going to find, like, some pea or something. It's like too solid. But I think and so I was always like, what? We really have these clear minds that aren't obscured by any afflictions. They're really clear in knowing, and all the afflictions are just like the clouds in the sky, and we're really free of all of this. Well, I believe that part, but I didn't really believe the part that our basic nature, like what's the reasoning that that love and compassion are part of our basic nature. That part has always eluded me. And he explains this actually pretty well. It still didn't quite go in until I saw this. And I don't know, it's not exactly the same, but it cuts it for me. I think I needed to see somewhere in there the reasoning. We're not exaggerating. It's a solid base. That's what they always say. These are wholesome emotions on a solid base. The other ones are exaggerated on a base of ignorance, and they won't hold up because they're not, like you're building a house on a poor foundation, where the other one you've got this solid base. And this was, I think, the connection is like, well, what is so solid about this, base? Well, for me, it always goes back to the suffering. This is what draws me into Buddhism. And so it is valid to have the concern of sentient beings in our mind. And it is valid to be, that it is a problem. Suffering is a problem, and it is something to be concerned about. This is it's not exaggerated. And to have a state of mind that's able to hold that in a balanced way with real love, where it's concern for the other, real compassion, where the object is the other, not getting into your own personal distress. So this takes some kind of insight. These feelings, he says, rely on insight into how beings suffer in the round of rebirth, called cyclic existence. And the depth of the feeling is enhanced through these insights into impermanence and emptiness. Somehow this kind of put it together for me finally. I just was eluded me until then. So he says, of course, love and compassion can be influenced by afflictive emotions, but true love and true compassion are unbiased. They're devoid of exaggeration because they're founded on this valid cognition of your relationship with others. So this perspective of dependent arising is extremely important. So we're trying to bring the wisdom part in here. Also, so from the side of dependent arising, also to see that everything is empty, the meditator who's trying to be joyful, get joyful, the joy is wishing for someone, the things that you're wishing them, all of these things are empty. It's good for us to bring that in. But for me, more tangibly is this, and that kind of answers a lot of things that kind of had eluded me. Okay, so we'll just close with this very, so over the course of time, what they were wishing for in terms of joy started in a way where it was kind of like wonderful that they have this, and even included in the Theravada things, even included nirvana. Really, it included limitless beings and nirvana. That was all there. And then it kind of grew into this where Vasubandhu was talking about, and maybe wish them this happiness. And then Alex Berzin goes into this thing where he talks about, all the different traditions and this and that, and for Tibetan traditions and these coming up to the present time. And you can see how it gets to the place where we get to what we use in our book here, which has these aspects, what Pabonka Rinpoche calls each four immeasurable has four immeasurable attitudes in it. And this is what we do when we make our long version of the four immeasurables. I'll read that first so that you know what I'm talking about here. What we say when we do our long version of the Four Immeasurables is we say, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. How wonderful. May they abide in that way. I shall cause them to abide in that way. And then Buddha or whomever, please inspire me to be able to do so. And we do that with everyone. How wonderful it would be if beings had happiness. May they have this. I will do everything I can. Please, I need some help. And then it's how wonderful it would be if all beings were free from suffering. And then the last one, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never parted from upper rebirth and liberation's excellent bliss. This is the joy. This is the sorrowless joy. When we hear about wishing the joy that's sorrowless joy, we're wishing not the car. We're wishing, permanent peace and Buddhahood. And may they never be parted. I shall cause them never to be parted. Guru, Buddha, please inspire me to be able to do so. And so in those, that first one, how wonderful it would be is like we have this intention. May they be parted is like an aspiration. And then I'll help, I'll do what I can. I'll make them, they shall never be parted, is this kind of exceptional resolve. And then we make this request. So these are four kind of immeasurable: intention, aspiration, exceptional resolve, and immeasurable request. And that's the way that, why I probably had to do all this research, because it really is different in the different traditions, but it really ends up with this beautiful kind of practice where, we can expand our minds, make ourselves on the cushion, have a mind that takes everyone in, and then learn how to integrate that within our lives. And just having a more peaceful mind is a good start, right? We can walk out of the meditation hall a little more peaceful, have in mind how we might interact with others in a more suitable way when we've fallen down, because we purify. Just, it's like fall down, purify, get back up, go on. That's what I've learned from Venerable Children. Don't wallow. And she used to drive me crazy with that. It's like, I used to actually get upset with her, like, how can you be over this so quick? I'm still upset. And she's just like, on to the next thing, and nothing happened. I'm like, God. A week later, I'm like, I thought she didn't care, actually. But, really what it is, hey, she worked it out. And that allows you then to interact with people in a way that's actually balanced, wholesome, helpful. You can have this equanimous open door when they're finally ready to come around. You're actually in a suitable place to do something. So, okay. Does anyone have any questions before we dedicate? Yeah.
Possibly you were talking about the dark side of jealousy taken to such an extreme level that it becomes pathological or a mental illness.
That was my thought.
Yeah. How could you go about helping someone that is that way without continuing to enable them to become dependent upon your kindness?
Well, dependent upon your kindness. Well, the one thing that came up with this person that was interesting to me was I was with this person and we were with a bunch of people that we didn't know. I don't remember what this was. And she helped this boy and gave him a Band-Aid. And he thanked her. She was about probably in her 50 years old. It was the first time she had actually done something for somebody in her life, and they had thanked her.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God. I worked in the helping professions all day long. You're trying to help people. And what I realized in that moment was like, wow, she really never learned how to appreciate how good it feels to help other people and to rejoice in other people. So
She felt obligated?
I think, sometimes I think that jealousy, this is, my own Psychology Today pop version. You can get so much wanting things from others because you're lacking so much that you can't see clearly, and you really get quite dark and quite destructive and cause a lot of harm. You distance yourself from about everyone who cares for you because they don't know what the heck to do. But what I thought from that is like, it was like, this would be something that would be good to help her to recognize how great it feels because the boy was appreciative of having this Band-Aid or something. It was so small, but it was so beautiful. To never have that experience, I think try to recreate that so she has the experience. But how not to have a person depend on you? I don't know if, how could the person depend on you is kind of my question. Like, can you bring them joy? I mean, like, a person has to eat for themselves and do their own exercises and
Have to show them their own path, because it seems like people like that think that they're gonna find the path or the answer through other people.
yeah,
Feeling, like you said, it's an attachment to like benefiting their ego almost.
yeah.
Or however you describe it.
Well, I think if you can find a way to stay involved and be like more modeling things, and then giving supportive statements to their positive behaviors, I mean, because a lot of times people hear what isn't working. We get a lot of negative feedback, which is helpful to a degree, but it really is helpful to learn wholesome ways to be and what the steps are to get there. A lot of these things that are at this degree need like psychotherapy and kind of interventions that are beyond like just the family and the spiritual counselor or whatever, spiritual folks. It really takes one-on-one professional help. But being supportive of that is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And helping people to access, in my job, that was one of my roles, is to help people feel good about going to psychotherapists or going here and going there, just to make them feel like normalized, like, wow, a lot of people do this, and,
For sure. Awesome. Thank you.
support, finding a healthy way to be supportive. Okay, so let's dedicate.